by the African slaves. If you see that imaginary line going down the back of the porch there, to the right of the house, that was built in 1680. Then when Frederick died, his son inherited the house, so the son built this side. That's why it's built in 2 different stages, and they had to change the roof, and he went straight up. This side was for the dairy. This side, this is what Frederick built. Frederick and Adolf. Adolf was the son. So we're going to go inside, and we're going to see just how the house was divided. But the slaves did not live here. They had to live in a slave shack way off. They would come here early in the morning, and they would work from sun up to sundown. And because there was an overseer who used the office right there, he occupied the office. Now the grist mill was here because this is how they grind the corn and the wheat. This and these 2 buildings are the only 2 buildings that are original. But the other buildings, the barn, the activity center, because what they wanted to do when they lost the property was to have a site where you could see and you can imagine just what the story was about. But they had to bring those two houses there. Now we're going to go inside this house, and now you see the house was built in 2 different sections. Yeah.
So like you said, the garden wasn't really there.
No,
that's just to show
but
you.
because we have a museum, we have to show you, we couldn't, because there's so many people live, Briarcliff, Ossining, all those areas that they had. But 52,000 acres was a lot of land to own, and all the people that lived there, the house was split, the property was split into 229 different homes. But now, the reason why they built this, okay, they built this here because they wanted to do. And if you come in here, now you look at the bricks on the floor. During the time of slavery, they did not have bricks on the floor. This is all matted dirt.
Yeah.
Okay, so what they had to do, there were 23 slaves, 5 were women, and 6 were men, and they had children, and then men not fit for work. So the slave women, because they were Dutch, naturally they spoke Dutch because of Mr. Phillips. The women had to put this yoke on the back of their neck, and they would go out, and they would milk 12 cows twice a day with 1 bucket on one side, 1 bucket on the other. Now, each generation gets taller and taller. I'm small, and that's why I was telling you about the slave on my side of the family, because I'm 80. My grandfather was Caucasian, okay, because he was the slave master's son. So if you look at it, my father was born in 1904, my grandmother was born in 1880, so she didn't know that their slavery had ended. So that's why she couldn't read or write. So I'm the last person in my family that's still, I have a sister that's 88, but she's in a nursing home, and I'm 80. So all the other families are 90, so that's why I'm telling you about, because this is how slavery happened. And if you look about these women that worked so hard, and they had to go out, milk the cows, and bring it back, the milk back, because when they made the butter, you have to use the cream. So if you're lucky, if the cow didn't kick over the bucket of milk, you'd have to go back and milk the cow again and get more, and this is what they did. So they would come over here, they would pour the milk into the bowls, and then when you do that, you would catch the cream. The cream is what goes into the churn there. And what they would do, they put it in here. And the reason why I know, my grandmother did it in South Carolina. So you put the cream in here. And that's all it took. And I remember my grandmother used to have to pick up a rhythm because this was hard work, but she had a half of one on a table. And grandma would put it in and she would start to churn the butter, and then she would go. And she would do it 25 minutes at a time.
Wow.
She would wipe the sweat off her face and then start again. What they did in the colonial days, even when my grandmother had a little red thing that she would drop into it, and that would change it from, to make it white to yellow, because that was like carrot, a little carrot, and that would enhance the flavor. So they did the same thing in the colonial times, so this was about 1690, what they did. Once they made it into butter, then they have to take it to Firkin, because this was, they have to ship it because this man was import-export. So the butter that they needed, as they went around from Africa. They drop off some of the slaves in Barbados and all the islands, and because they had slaves there. So when you put the butter from here, you would have to salt it, because the salt was a preservation, and that would not help it from not being spoiled. Then you put the butter from here, and then you would take a mallet, this little mallet here. You see how smooth it is on the end? And then they would pound it down. But it had to go in a circular motion. When it goes in a circular motion, you know what they're doing? Sealing up the air pockets. Around and around. Once this is filled, it holds 56 pounds of butter. Then the men would come over, and they have a way of pushing it down. You can almost hear the air come out. Psh, and then they would nail it down, and then it was ready to be shipped out. 2 women from sunup to sundown worked here. The other 3 women worked in that room. And in that room, this is my stick here. I had both my knees replaced.
Well, you look great for your
I have
age.
metal parts in both my knees. So,
You definitely look great for your age.
so in this room, thank you. In this room, you had the slaves. There were 2 women worked in the dairy. The other 3 women worked here. Their job was to cook around the clock. And because they lived so far, they would come, that's why you have big aprons, I'm dressed like this. They would bring from their garden sweet potatoes, string beans, kale, whatever they had in their aprons, because it couldn't go back. Then when they got here, someone would start the fire. The low pots, they were for the ones that were going to cook a long time. And in the high pots, they would cook mush, especially for the children. Mush is grits and cornmeal. Now the 23 slaves, this is all inventory if you go into New York Public Library. Men, 6 men. Women, 5. Men not fit for work. And who do you think they were? They were, some of them were disabled. If you work as a slave from the time you're 6 years of age to the time you get 45, you are wasted. You're like a senior citizen. So these are the men. There were 4 of them. These children are the products of these men and women. And we do know their names are similar. This is Big Tom, Little Tom, Caesar, there's a Caesar, and then there's one named Diamond, his father's name is Diamond, and then you have Samson and a little boy by the name of Sam. They had 1 little girl, and that made up the 23 slaves. The clothing is a typical of the clothing that you would find the children would wear, especially the little boys. And I always call it a little pocket in the back here. The little girls wore the shirts, and they might have been a little longer to cover, okay? These shoes were very uncomfortable, and they're almost like 2 left feet, but that's why when I grew up in the South, I knew that shoes were too hard to wear. That's why most African slaves or African descendants lived without shoes. But my mother brought us up north, so that's why I'm able to, because she wanted us to be educated, right? Now, if you look at the blanket here, now this is called a pallet. And this is what, because slaves did not have beds. Even descendants didn't have beds, because I remember my grandmother used to make a pallet. Now this has straw in it, but it does have a tendency to poke you, but my grandmother would put rags, burlap rags in it, and then she would sew it. So you can see, and here, because they were slaves here, they couldn't go back home, you would lay the pallet out, the fire would be cooking, and the babies could lay here on the floor. And I'm dressed just like a typical slave woman. And if you see how I'm wearing the apron, this little pocket here, these are the bowls that the children would eat mush from. And my grandmother, bless her heart, she had a corncob pipe, but men and women smoked pipes. But these are ceramic. And they had tobacco growing into the garden as well. And this is how they used to can back then. This is colonial time. They would put the substance in here, and then you would put the paper. The paper is treated, and you would tie it with a string, and it would last for a certain while. But when I came along, we had the mason jars, and that's what my mother used to. And my job was to get the tops, to make sure I find all the tops that would match it. And this is how they lived. This is what I call a humble kitchen. Now, this is only the slaves. Now, if Mr. Phillips came here and he wanted something to eat, the slaves would cook the food here and he would serve it upstairs. But I call this a humble kitchen because I'm going to show you how wealthy this family were. And they were like, I call it the Martha Stewart kitchen when you go upstairs. It's got a lot of class to it. Okay, so we will, I'll make sure I close the door here. Yeah, okay, we're going to go out this way.
I see you have the light here, but what
We
kind
have
of
that light.
did they have? They
didn't have a
didn't
light.
have?
They didn't have that light because
So was it candles they would use?
what it was, we'd have to open the door.
doors and
We'd have to
whatever
open the door
daylight
and then
you
the fire would be going, so
I
that would be
see.
your light. But because we have a museum here, that's why they put light.
Sure.
And you know why? Because now we pushed back the time. It gets dark, so you have to be able to see. So
Sure.
we used to have the tours till 3:30 or 4, but now it's darker now, so they put the light up there so people can see. Yeah, so we're gonna go up this way. Now we're going upstairs to what I call the Martha Stewart kitchen.